I'm going to be talking about the status of the Iran nuclear talks, and this is going to be an overview. I'm not going to touch on every issue to get through it in the time. But I want to deal with the fact that we all know these talks are controversial on the Hill, that they've attracted bipartisan opposition. And a lot of this opposition is because members of Congress believe that the administration has made some unwise and even dangerous concessions to get a deal with Iran. What I'm going to talk about is that some of these concessions are much more dangerous than you're aware of, and even more dangerous concessions are being proposed. There's three issues I see right now facing the Iran talks. First of all, there's a July 20th deadline. There was an agreement last November for an interim deal with Iran that was supposed to lead to negotiations that would result in a grand bargain by July 20th. The talks are deadlocked right now because Iran is refusing to make significant concessions and has even backtracked. I mean, there are real differences between the West and Iran right now on getting a deal that would roll back their program and promote American security interests and the interests in the region. But at the same time, the President said this week something extraordinary. He said in his West Point speech, there is a very real chance of reaching a breakthrough agreement on Iran's nuclear program. The only way I can see that we're going to get a deal on Iran's nuclear program is if we make more dangerous concessions. We are so far apart, and the concessions we've made so far are already so dangerous. The only way the President can say that is that he's prepared to do something that I think would be truly catastrophic for American national security and the security of the region. To start off, I want to talk about how has our policy on the Iranian nuclear program evolved since May of 2012. Until about May of 2012, the Obama administration had largely retained the approach of the Bush administration. They were much more interested in negotiating with the Iranians, but they had retained the Bush administration's position that Iran must suspend any reprocessing of plutonium, which they haven't begun yet, work on heavy water reactors, and any uranium enrichment activities. There wasn't supposed to be any new reprocessing heavy water or enrichment activities. Construction underway was supposed to stop, and the Iranians were supposed to cooperate with IAEA inspectors. Well, the Iranians wouldn't agree with most of those terms, so we made an extraordinary compromise at a multilateral meeting in May of 2012. We told the Iranians they could continue to enrich uranium to the reactor-grade level if they gave up their 20% enriched uranium. Now, what this means is reactor-grade uranium is 3.5 to 5% uranium-235. 20% uranium is enriched to a higher level. The 20% uranium is intended for a research reactor in Tehran, according to the Iranians. And the Obama administration claimed that reactor-grade uranium isn't that dangerous because it takes a lot longer to turn into weapons-grade uranium. That's false. It's been repeatedly proven as false by experts across the political spectrum. It only takes about 3 weeks longer to turn 20% uranium into weapons-grade than reactor-grade uranium. They invented a justification for this outrageous compromise, which led to a series of other compromises, which resulted in the diplomatic deal last November, which is still being worked on. So due to the May 2012 compromise, this is where we are right now. We have essentially conceded to Iran the right to enrich uranium. Now, Secretary Kerry has denied this. The Russians have been very clear. They think that's what this amounts to. And if you look at the documents, nothing that we've agreed to with the Iranians contradicts this position. Iran will be allowed to enrich uranium to a reactor grade. It's supposed to dilute its 20% uranium to the reactor grade level. And there's supposed to be a ceiling on how much reactor grade uranium Iran can make. If it will continue to enrich to reactor grade, but it's supposed to convert that uranium into uranium oxide. So far, Iran has diluted about half of its 20% uranium stockpile, which is consistent with its agreement last November. It has not turned its reactor-grade uranium into uranium oxide because the facility to do that has not been finished yet. We've told Iran that we want it to reduce its centrifuges from about 19,000 to 6,000. That's currently our negotiating position with the Iranians. But most dangerous is that we are considering letting Iran keep the Arak heavy water reactor, which would be a source of plutonium. Now, those of you who know anything about nuclear physics, you know that plutonium is the most desired nuclear fuel for a bomb. It has a lower critical mass, meaning you need less of it, which is important when building a missile warhead. But I'm going to get into the Iraq reactor in a moment. Iran agreed not to pursue plutonium reprocessing, and that supposedly is still their position, and that Iran is supposed to cooperate with IAEA inspectors. Here's why these compromises are so dangerous. We know that Iran has pursued every conceivable avenue over the past 20 years to pursue nuclear weapons. Laser enrichment, uranium enrichment, they're pursuing heavy water technology, plutonium experiments. We've seen so much evidence about the nuclear fuel cycle. There's a laptop that the CIA supposedly obtained with experimentation on building nuclear warheads. The amount of evidence added together is so damning. There's no doubt this nation has a determined program to build nuclear weapons. Writing off a specific piece of technology as for peaceful uses is impossible to do when you take the totality of all the evidence we've amassed over the past 20 years. Iran could construct up to 8 nuclear weapons today using its reactor-grade uranium stockpile if this uranium was further enriched to weapons grade. And it could produce about 1 weapon with this reactor-grade stockpile in a few weeks. This is also something that's been confirmed by a number of organizations around town. Iran's concession to convert its 20% enriched uranium to reactor grade or to convert its reactor grade uranium to uranium oxide is easily reversible. It's not much of a concession by the Iranians. But the Iraq reactor is especially dangerous because it would produce about 2 weapons worth of plutonium every year. We're looking at 2 possible compromises to reduce the risk of this reactor. We've moved away from our previous position that this reactor has to stop. Construction is about 1 to 2 years away from completion. Construction should stop. We've now discussed 2 possible positions. Either that this reactor be turned into a light water reactor, which would make it proliferation resistant. It would still produce plutonium if the fuel rods were removed early, but that would be detectable and more difficult to do. And that's a proposal that the West has been discussing with Iran. Or that it be fueled with enriched uranium at a lower power level. It sounds sort of counterintuitive, but when a heavy water reactor uses enriched uranium fuel and is run at a lower power level, it produces substantially less plutonium in its spent fuel rods. Russia and China are pushing this latter option, and Iran was in favor of it until a couple of weeks ago when they said the Iraq reactor will continue as a heavy water reactor at full power, but don't worry that it will be used to produce plutonium because they've pledged they will never produce a plutonium reprocessing plant. This is not going to allay enormous concerns by Israel and Saudi Arabia that Iran is planning on building a plant that will produce substantial amounts of plutonium. This should be a deal killer in my position. There's no way we can have an agreement on Iran's nuclear program if they have a reactor that can produce substantial amounts of plutonium. It is a target for the Israeli Air Force. But moving beyond that, the administration is not admitting how many centrifuges they want the Iranians to give up. The number that's been circulated is about 6,000. Iran has come back and said it needs 30,000 centrifuges versus its current 19,000 because it needs to run centrifuges to fuel the Bushehr light water reactor, which has been operative for a couple of years. Now, Bushehr gets its fuel from Moscow, and it's unclear whether the Iranians are even capable of making fuel rods that won't cause this reactor to blow up or self-destruct. But Iran says it wants to be self-sufficient, it wants to build its own fuel rods, and it's insisting it needs more centrifuges to do this. Then there's the issue of cooperation with the IAEA. There's a military facility called Parchin where Iran supposedly has conducted explosive testing related to nuclear warhead research. Iran has never allowed has not allowed the IAEA access to that facility for about 2.5 years. There is construction there which appears to be related to sanitize this facility to remove evidence of nuclear related research that they shouldn't have been engaged in. There's also a dispute over something called exploding wire detonators, which can be a crucial part of making a nuclear weapon. There have been a number of press reports saying that Iran is fully cooperating with the IAEA because it has reduced its 20% stockpile and it has agreed to talk about these detonators. It has agreed to provide an explanation that these detonators are for peaceful purposes. It's not giving any credible explanation for why it is pursuing these. And this is the strategy they've taken whenever they've been caught red-handed. They invent a civilian use for the technology that they found. The IAEA has been lamentably wimpy in trying to explain away these detonators. And a number of organizations around town have been trying to call the IAEA out to say, you have to be blunt, that this is something that has to be explained much better than the Iranians have done. So the question remains, how can the President's position that there's a very real chance of a breakthrough be true, given how far apart both sides are and the fact that the Iranians are going in the other direction? In my opinion, there's only one answer. He is so desperate for a deal before he leaves office, he will make one regardless of the terms. Now, we've seen this kind of stuff happen before. Remember when the Clinton administration signed the International Court Agreement as Mr. Clinton was leaving office. I think weak administrations may do a lot of bad things as they're about to leave town. And I'm troubled because there are other signs on other issues that that's what Mr. Obama is planning on doing. Look at his announcement on Afghanistan troops this week, that he's going to pull all troops out by the end of 2016 except for a small force at the embassy. He wants to leave office to say he removed all troops from Afghanistan regardless of the situation on the ground when he does it. Mr. Obama said yesterday that he's going to close the Guantanamo Bay prison camp so he can leave a clean slate for his successor, despite the fact that we all know that the reason that that facility has not been closed is because no one can find a way to deal with its dangerous inmates. The countries that will take them will probably let them go. No U.S. state will take them. No foreign country will take them. So if the President has a plan of closing that, I think it's something he's going to do at the end of December 2016 so he can escape the political flack for doing it. So let's talk about what to do about this. Senator Corker put forward a extremely good amendment requiring a joint resolution of disapproval of any deal on Iran. Now, the Senate Democrats do not want to vote on this amendment because there is enormous opposition from people who care about this issue throughout the country. So they found a way to not take a committee vote, move this right to the floor without an amendment. This amendment is pretty important, and I'm not a Senate staffer, but those of you who are, I hope there's a way to somehow get a vote on the Corker amendment.
The original legislation has been pulled now.
Has it been pulled?
There's nothing to vote on now.
Okay.
They took away the vehicle.
Okay.
So something else is going to happen.
Well, so something like that should be resubmitted. What also has been pulled, but is even more important, is the Menendez-Kirk Nuclear Weapon Free Iran Act of 2013, which would require sanctions unless Iran dismantles its illicit nuclear infrastructure. This is one of several things that are absolutely crucial to reduce the threat from the Iranian nuclear program. Iran should have no centrifuges. It should not have the Iraq heavy water reactor. All of its enriched uranium stockpile must leave the country, and it has to cooperate with international inspectors. Short of that, we're pushing a deal that's simply going to allow Iran to covert nuclear program. There was a Wall Street Journal article, an incredible article this week that I urge you to take a look at, that says that Iran has retained its team of nuclear weapons scientists and never stopped researching nuclear weapons. I was with the Central Intelligence Agency before as a House Intelligence Committee. I went through the nonsense of the 2007 and 2011 NIEs that said Iran stopped its nuclear program in 2003. Not true. I read the intelligence on these estimates. I briefed them to members of the Intelligence Committee. The evidence didn't add up. These were politicized NIEs, and Alan Dershowitz made a great comment at the end of 27, referring to them as stupid intelligence, and I think he was right. And the final point I wanted to add is that I think it's essential for our elected representatives and presidential candidates to state publicly and repeatedly that they will not be bound by anything this administration negotiates on the Iranian nuclear program. If we make it clear to our European allies that don't waste your time, because the next administration is going to throw out whatever this administration agrees to at the last minute on Iran. Maybe a bad deal can be stopped, and we can start over when we have new leadership in the White House in January 2017 that won't give Iran more time to build a nuclear weapon and put our national security at risk. So with that, I can take your question.
Fred, thank you very much. Again, let me just put two things on the table for you to address, if you would. One is the condition of sanctions at the moment. And the other is, if the deal is done, as you say, what is the status of it? Is it supposed to be submitted to Congress? Is it going to be an executive agreement? Is it going to be simply thrown out there and we're all supposed to conform to it?
The administration has been slowly weakening sanctions over the last 18 months or so, and all the sanctions that have been approved by Congress were passing legislation that the administration fought against and then took credit for. And I think we're going to continue to see a variety of sanctions approved by the United States and by the EU whittled away over time. And the problem with that, once these sanctions are gone, they're pretty hard to put back. I don't think the administration intends to submit this agreement to Congress. It won't be a treaty. And I think that's sort of the trajectory they're on right now.
Okay, thank you. George?
From what you've done and everything else, one of the concerns is the increasing lack of confidence in us by our allies. As this goes forward, what's your crystal ball about the Egyptians, the Turks, and the Saudi Arabians of saying, if we can't depend on the U.S., and Iran's developing a nuclear weapon, that we need to rapidly develop our own capability?
This is a real concern, and there are reports that the Saudis are looking into acquiring nuclear weapons by buying them from the Pakistanis. I don't know that that's true, but that's been repeatedly reported in the news media. And I mean, the Israelis and the Saudis and other regional states, they're not fooled by the spin they're hearing on these talks. I mean, the idea of Iran keeping enough enriched uranium to make several nuclear weapons and possibly being able to build a plutonium reactor, this is a big threat to regional states, and I think they're going to respond accordingly, and it's one reason why our relations with the Saudis have gone down so much.
Good. Dan, did you have anything else on this? Get a mic, please.
Thank you for wonderful. I'm involved in this with the Senate. That Senate bill you talked about has 59 co-sponsors, the one that would set terms and conditions on the administration's negotiations. But unfortunately, the commitment by the Democrats in the Senate to not bring it to the floor, it's purely a matter of Senator Reid's desire, and there's no mechanism to make that happen. So that's probably not going to happen in the rest of the term. I think that the possibility exists of reintroducing the idea of requiring the president to bring any agreement to the Senate. That's a real political conundrum for the Democrats, and even Senator Menendez, who we unfortunately decided to give an award on the day that he decided to kill that bill. It was
timing is everything.
Rather bad timing, but he is not going to allow the Democrats to be embarrassed. Even though his heart's in the right place, his political instincts can only go so far. So it's a real challenge to actually get something done. And I actually think, I'm sure you agree, the Iranians are quite happy to string everything along. Time is their ally, in their view. And if things don't move quickly, I think they're quite happy about that. And they continue to have this capability for this breakout capability. People aren't even talking about them except in that context anymore. So they have, in fact, become a de facto nuclear power, because they're as far away from it as Germany or Japan is, as you said. So they've won in many ways.
The Iranians are shrewd negotiators, and we make a concession, they pocket it, and then they push for another one.
Well, and I think just to further elaborate on your point about the sanctions regime eroding, it's important to understand that what's actually happening is business is moving briskly back into Iran. The regime has, I think, gotten life support, certainly politically, and increasingly, it seems, economically. And as Fred said, this idea that, well, if we're not satisfied with whatever comes out of this process, we'll just put them back in place is not on. And it is, well, I'm fond of calling a lot of these things national security fraud to be claiming otherwise. And the administration does it and astonishingly gets away with it largely. Admiral?
I couldn't agree more with what you said and the concerns, and I've always been very concerned on the Iranian North Korean program. And I was wondering if you could talk on how they're using North Korea as a way to skirt around a lot of the actions that they want to keep covert and so on, and as it moves their nuclear program forward. As Clapper said himself, they're 2 weeks away from a bomb.
I'm very concerned about possible collaboration between the Iranians and the North Koreans on nuclear technology. There have been many reports of Iranian nuclear scientists attending North Korean nuclear tests. We don't know the extent of the cooperation. There are many experts, including Ambassador John Bolton, who believes that the reactor that would have produced plutonium that the North Koreans were building in Syria was being funded by Iran to give Iran a source of plutonium. I find that credible. There's been very close collaboration on missiles, and I think there's every reason to believe that they're collaborating on nuclear technology too.
Yeah, I think that's actually not a matter of conjecture anymore. I thought that we had lots of evidence that Iranians are at the North Korean test sites and the North Koreans are in Iran and so on.
That Syrian reactor, Maury used to say.
Mike.
That Syrian reactor that Israel destroyed was, of course, of a North Korean design, and Maury was just commenting, I'm not sure that we have knowledge of this, maybe Claire knows better, that there may have been 1 or 2 North Koreans on the ground at the time of the attack.
Collateral damage. Did you want to say anything else, Maury?
No, that.
Okay, yeah. Good, thank you, McCarthy and all that. Good, anybody else on this before we let Fred go? If not, Fred, thank you very much. Well done.